a format that you wanted, or you had a flow that you wanted to go through.
Well, I thought maybe we could talk about diet unless you had something else more important.
No, I completely want to focus on diet.
Okay, and I thought it might be best, we might learn the most if we just dialogue about it. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So why don't we start with, tell me your thoughts as to what you think would be the best diet for dogs then.
Um, I think for the longest time, and I wrote this in my email, is I did a lot of research and I've read a lot about a lot of different people kind of really swaying towards raw meat or heavy meat diets. But just personally, just you do what's right or what feels right for you. And I just know that I don't eat meat. So, but when I have taken bites, I just know how it feels. And just from my perspective of them being domesticated and fruits and vegetables, kind of being what makes me feel good. And when I see they may not like to eat it sometimes, but I know that it has a positive impact. So I think for me, my thoughts are, just really fresh ingredients, no matter what it is. I think it's kind of bizarre to feed them cows or buffalo. Just, size-wise, I just don't feel like it's a match.
Well, we could talk
Yeah.
about that. It's a good point. We perhaps we can assume that we know there are problems with the commercial formulas, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you know that they're not organic and they'll have Roundup in them and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So we can put that aside for the moment. But let's look at this question. A lot of people feel like that they should feed a raw meat diet.
Yes.
And often the argument is that it's natural to dogs.
Right.
Right. And
right.
so
That's what they say.
So one thing to look at is that question is it really natural? Because if you think the way it is, it's not pleasant to talk about, but you think about the way it is for a wolf, and
Right.
they're hunting down an animal and killing it, and then they're eating it after doing that. And
Right.
so they're eating the entire animal. They're eating the
Right.
skin and on the connective tissue and the muscle and the organs inside the liver and the heart and the pancreas and lungs and everything, right? The brain.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, how does that compare with going down to the market and buying a package of meat?
I mean, absolutely, completely differently.
It's completely different because the meat doesn't have any blood in it.
Right.
It's only part of the animal. It's not the whole
Right.
animal, which isn't their diet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if
So,
they were to go out and eat a rodent, they would eat the rodent, right?
yeah, or if they kill a deer, they'd eat the whole deer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So then would you agree that the assumption that people make that feeding meat from a market is natural, like it is for a wolf, is a false idea?
I agree. It is false. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then we look at then the other question perhaps is what kind of alternatives can we consider to that? What have you tried? What have you experimented with?
For the most part, I try to keep my dogs on a largely fruit and vegetable diet with grains and beans.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, they were vegan, but I've since trickled in some meat. So I try to keep it limited, though.
Have you looked at the last edition of our book?
Yes, that's exactly why I reached out to you, because
okay.
Yeah, I noticed that you were a proponent of raw meat before, and I was just over the moon excited to see that you kind of stepped away from that and towards, fresh vegetables and fruits. And
And there are several reasons for that. We usually, my wife and I, who co-authored the book, we usually talk about three things to address. Not that we have to, but three things to address about it. One is the health aspect. Another is the question of resources for the earth, if we can keep doing that. And the third one is the ethics of treating animals that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as the health part of it, the reason that we made the shift, one of the reasons, and I'm just looking at the health consideration, was because how the world's changed. A lot of people don't understand this or they have trouble grasping it. It's interesting. I've tried to tell people about this and they just don't get it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the world has changed very, very much from what it was 20 or 30 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with the contamination of our environment. So that now if you're feeding animals meat, or if you're a human eating meat or
Right.
animal products, we're talking about getting a pretty heavy load of chemicals in your body,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And a lot of people don't realize that, just to give you an idea how much of an impact it can be, um, that our government has approved now the use of 100,000 chemicals,
Yeah.
100,000. And
In
the
our
problem,
meat.
not just in food, all across the environment, cleaning,
Yeah.
medical, put into food, given to livestock, put on our lawns, everything, all these
Wow.
things. And they all,
Yeah.
again, um, maybe you would appreciate it if I put it like this, that as a culture, I'm talking about the US, I don't know about the
Yeah.
rest of the world, but
Right.
as a culture, we have not really acted intelligently, because what we've done is we've allowed the invention of chemicals that we use for particular purposes. Like you might say, for instance, use an insecticide that instead of a natural substance, we make an artificial one, and now it lasts 10 times as long. See?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we see that as an advantage. But
Right.
what we're not addressing is that the reason it lasts so long is because it's unnatural. It's never existed on our planet before.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's no way that nature has to get rid of it. There's no mechanism to
Right.
break it down, you see.
Right. Yeah.
So the problem is these 100,000 chemicals have accumulated over the years, getting higher and higher amounts. And so they're now contaminating everybody's bodies. There's the children born today, when they test them, have over 300 chemicals in their bodies.
Yeah.
300.
That's amazing.
It is
Yeah.
amazing. Some of them are carcinogens.
Yeah. Yep.
So the problem is feeding at the top of the food chain. Are you familiar with the idea of a food chain?
Yes.
A lot of people have trouble grasping it. So if it's okay with you, I thought I'd explain that a little bit.
Please. Yes. Please do.
Yeah. The other word that's used for that, more in the science realm, is bioaccumulation, but food chains,
Yes.
an easier term to understand, because you think of a chain having links. So
Yes.
if you start out, say, with a plant growing in the soil, picking up some chemicals from the air and water that we're talking about,
Yeah.
that accumulates in the plant. And then when the plant is eaten by an animal, it accumulates in the animal,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
you get up to the top of the food chain, what we call the top, are the ones that are at the upper links of the chain that are eating the animals that have fed on the other animals and other plants. So they
Yeah.
have the most chemicals in them.
Yeah.
So in our culture in the US, the ones that are at the top of the food chain are human beings, dogs, and cats.
Yep.
So let me, if it's okay with you, I'll read something to you here
Please. Yes.
from, let me switch over here if I can. Here we go. This is from a paper I did that explains this a little bit. Here we go. So I wrote about this one time, and this might make sense if I read this. So that's about the idea of food chain, so people can kind of understand what the significance of it is. And very often when if you read a scientific study about this,
Yeah.
it'll be kind of complicated because they're talking about things we're not familiar with, like micrograms and milligrams and so on. It's hard to understand. So I put it in very simple terms.
Sure.
So see if this makes sense to you.
Okay.
So assuming that the chemicals we're talking about that are released into our environment go down through the wastewater or in the air after we've used them, or in the soil, as they spread around our environment and get into the soil the plants are growing on, which is what happens because it's carried by winds and things and water that's used in streams and right.
Yeah.
So in other words, when we flush things down the toilet and in the sinks, that like chemicals that we've used or paints or whatever it is, or medicines we've taken, it goes down to a wastewater plant. And the wastewater plant supposedly cleans the water, but it really doesn't take out these things.
Right.
So water goes into the streams and then goes into the ocean and it goes into the lakes, and that in a quick way, that's how it happens. So let's assume that we're talking about the plants are now in our environment are growing up on contaminated soils and water. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what I wrote about it. If you have a steer that's feeding on plants and eats the plants, and I was going to put this in, instead of micrograms and milligrams, I'm just going to refer to the chemicals as a drop of chemical.
Okay.
Makes it simpler, okay?
Yeah.
So let's say the steer eats 50 plants a day. And so let's say that the plant has 1 drop in it and eats 50 plants. Then, I'm sorry, I'm looking over to the right because that's where your little window is now.
Oh, okay.
I shouldn't do that. I should look up. Okay, so let's assume that steer eats 50 plants. Then it picks up 50 drops that are stored in its body, right?
Yeah.
So he does this, the steer does this day after day. So, for example, by the second day, there's now 100 drops that are accumulated in its tissues. By the third day, there's 150 drops. By day 30, there's 1,500 drops. After 5 months, there's 7,500 drops that have accumulated. And let's say when the deer is slaughtered, it has 10,000 drops stored in the muscles and organs. Now your dog eats that meat containing these drops.
Right.
So let's say every portion of meat fed to the dog contains 500. We're just guessing, but let's say it contains 500 drops. And each day your dog accumulates 500 drops in its body. After a year, stored in your dog's body will be 365 days times 500 drops, which is 182,500 drops.
Wow.
So you see the problem.
This is stuff that their bodies can't break down.
And they can't break it down because it's unnatural, or they don't have the mechanisms. Natural, they can't develop the mechanism, so it's stored in the fat and in the tissues, and then they have effects on the body eventually because the dose increases. You see,
right?
The dose gets larger and larger.
Yeah, is that what causes some of the fatty bubbles that build up on their bodies as they get old? Oh, okay. I thought maybe that was
lipomas. You mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. But the thing is that they're accumulating not just one, but many, many chemicals. And the sad thing about it is that over 90% of these chemicals have never been tested for health effects in humans.
Yeah.
And not at all in dogs and cats.
Right.
So we have no idea what they do, right? And some of them are obviously toxic. Some of them have been shown to be carcinogens, so we know they're toxic.
Right.
So what it comes down to is, see if this makes sense to you. Considering this is the way it is in the world today, this is what's happened. Does it make sense to you then to feed them at the top of the food chain?
Absolutely not. Not for them and not for us.
Yeah, considering that they're going to be exposed to these chemicals.
Right.
And especially if you couple that with the actual experience people have of going to a veterinarian who never mentions this at all.
Right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that was part of the other concern is, there so many of them, if not most of them, are in a completely different field of pushing packaged food, of actually pushing this, which is surprising to me. Very surprising.
Well, they don't have much training in veterinary school. I can't speak for all the schools, but I know that there's very little training. When I went through, this is back at UC Davis in the 60s, But still, when I went through, we had a semester on feeding livestock, horses and cattle, and I had for feeding dogs and cats, I had a half hour,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they just basically said to feed commercial food.
Hmm. Yeah. It's
Most veterinarians don't have much training.
right. And I've come across maybe 10 or 12 when I tell them that I cook for them, they take a stance to say, don't do that because packaged food is a whole balanced diet that I can't provide, which is shocking to me because it doesn't logically make sense. Um, yeah, and just it's shocking to me that they are adamant to the point that now I really don't tell them that.
Yeah, well, they don't understand, and they just assume that you're not balanced. But like our
Right,
book, going back to our book, they are all balanced recipes.
right,
So you could
absolutely.
use those and you'd be fine, you see.
Yeah,
Plus you can use organic.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um,
So I think a lot of the health problems we're seeing now, especially the chronic problems, are due to this chemical accumulation.
yeah, in our meats and food.
And yeah, and also other animal products. Milk is high in some things, and cheese and fish is very high in mercury,
Mercury.
and
Yeah.
there's been a little testing the last few years. There was environmental working group did a study on dogs and cats, and they found, in fact, if I can go back to my paper here, I can read a
Yeah,
little
please.
bit about that to you. It's interesting. Um, where did I put that here? Let's see, sorry.
No, no, take your time.
Yeah, here we go. They did a study for pet foods, and they found, and again, like I said earlier, we don't really have much study in dogs and cats for their sensitivities to chemicals or how much they can handle, because it's not necessarily the same for dogs versus cats versus humans. We vary
Right.
that way. So um, what they used, the environmental working group, when they did this study of quite an array of pet foods. I won't go into all of them, but they did a pretty wide range of pet foods, cheap to expensive, and they analyzed them, and they compared them then to what was acceptable for humans, what they call the reference dosage limit for human beings, because that's all we have,
Right.
based on the California standard. So anyway, to summarize, what they found was for dogs, as just an example, just part of it. They did more than this, but just one part of it. They said a 50-pound dog that's eating 5 cups of dry food or one large can of wet food, and if they're eating a food that has, the higher contamination levels, they're going to be getting the level of arsenic that's 20 times acceptable maximum for humans. 20 times.
Wow.
They're going to get twice the acceptable limit of cadmium for humans. They're going to get 120 times acceptable mercury limit,
Wow.
120 times, and so
Did you
on.
say that? Did you say that's from one can?
Yeah.
Or
Hmm.
wow.
That's how
Wow.
much is in the food they're eating. There's some other ones like uranium is 5 times the accepted limit, and so on. There's other ones, vanadium and thallium, we don't have to go into.
Right.
But you get the idea
You're
that
just being poisoned.
they're being poisoned by the food
Yeah.
today
Yeah.
across the board because of all of these foods, unless they're organic, and even if they're organic, they're not necessarily free of it, just less of
Right.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you then, having gone through this rather quickly,
Yes.
um, what what do you see as a solution?
That's what I was coming to you for. I mean, I think I'm doing the best that I can to buy organic, whole foods and cook at home, or, do as many, I trick them into eating raw as much as possible, raw fruits and vegetables as much as possible. Um, but, ultimately hard, it's a hard thing to grasp for people, and it's a hard thing to, I guess, um, do, in people's daily life. And I was kind of hoping that you
Mhm.
would provide a solution.
Well, that's basically what we provided in this last edition of our book.
Yeah.
The only solution I could come up with so far is that considering how the world is and what's available as foods to us, that the best you can do is feed as low an amount of chemical as possible.
Yeah.
Instead of feeding, a meat that contains 120 times the mercury that's acceptable, how about feeding plants that have, 1/10 the acceptable amount, you see?
Right. Right.
So if you feed down at the lower part of the food chain, down at the lower level, before it's concentrated up the chain, then
Right.
you have putting less chemical into their bodies, and so they can handle it better than if they get
Right.
a really big dose as it builds up over the years. So that
Right.
was my
What
strategy.
What do you say to people who say, my dog won't eat it?
They will eat it. They love it.
Yeah.
I haven't
I
had
mean,
any dogs reject it.
that's true. I mean, if you mix it with meat, and cook it, they'll definitely eat it. But if they're not going to run to eat raw spinach or anything.
Well, the recipes in our book have been well accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
They like them. As soon as you offer to them, they really get excited.
yeah. No, mine do too. um, what do you say? You mentioned the vegan dog, the 20-year-old vegan dog in the latest book. Have you seen more like that in
Yeah, I
the
have
work?
seen it. I have had other people report to me they've had dogs gotten quite old on a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing is a study that came out, maybe it's been 2 years now since it came out. Let me go back over to that paper
Sure.
again. Because a lot of people don't, one of the objections is they'll say, well, dogs can't eat, plants and carbohydrates and that sort of thing. And so there was a study done that appeared in Nature Journal. It's either last year or the year before. I kind of think maybe the year before. Um, and let me see if I have the reference. Um, I don't see the reference. It's a Nature Journal, though. So anyway, what they did is that this group of scientists, for whatever reason, they wanted to compare dogs with wolves as far as their ability to their genetic code and what they could live on. So they say that they took 12 wolves from around the world and they looked at their DNA,
Hmm.
and then they took 60 dogs of 14 breeds and they looked at their DNA. And interestingly, what they found was that the dogs have evolved over the last few hundred years to
Right.
have activated genes that digest starch and carbohydrates as well as humans.
Right.
For example, wolves holding up two copies for amylase, which is one of the enzymes that digest starch. It's not the only one, but it's one.
Yeah.
And wolves have two copies, and dogs have 28 more.
Wow.
So
Wow.
what that means is the significance of that is that dogs now have been shown to be able to eat the same carbohydrates and plants as humans with no trouble and can digest them.
Right. Right. That makes sense to me. I mean, my dogs
Yeah,
love oatmeal.
yeah.
um, Shoot, I forgot my next question. I think the struggle that I find, because I'm such a proponent of, cooking for your dogs and giving them organic, fresh ingredients. Um, oh, shoot, I forgot. Oh, well, maybe you have something. Oh, you know what? Actually, there's another question I remember. Um, so yes, a lot of people do, and even dog food companies really push, your dog is a wolf. Underneath your dog is the primitive wolf, and the wolf hunts, and the wolf eats meat. I've heard, and I haven't confirmed this, but for people who push fruits and vegetables on our pets, they argue that the digestive system, the track is elongated and it's longer than wolves and closer to humans, which means they're actually not, um, you know, built for as much meat as the wolf is. But I know some people call them carnivores and some people call them omnivores. I guess what's your final opinion on that?
Well, I've seen various things too, but if you look what biologists, as opposed to people arguing for it, you say, oh, they're carnivores. But when
Yeah.
you look at a biologist evaluation, almost all of them call them omnivores, same as bears,
Right.
whereas cats are carnivores. They make that distinction. But yeah,
Yeah.
they're different. They're different physiology. Dogs and wolves have a different kind of body, really adapted to the way they used to live.
Right.
And that the reason that they have a shorter digestive tract, which makes their efficiency not as quite as good as ours. We have them 3 times as long or more.
Right.
Um, that's one of the reasons for cooking them, like we discussed in our book, to cook it ahead of time to make it more easily digestible.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What's your take on citrus or vitamin C for dogs? I know it's just like such a healer for humans, and I've been wanting to give it to them, but I've
Vitamin
been
C,
unsure. Vitamin C, there's citrus, like, oranges or lemons
I
or.
think it's okay. They make their own, so I don't know if it's necessary.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Um,
primates like monkeys and people, humans,
mhm. Yeah.
lost that ability because there was so much vitamin C in the food, they didn't have to make it anymore. So the
Oh,
genes are inactive,
oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
but
that's,
other animals make it.
yeah. Okay. And then apple cider vinegar. My dog always gets yeast infections in her ears, and I will rinse her all over with it. I didn't
Hmm.
see that mentioned in the latest book, but I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I haven't used it a whole lot. It's I have not recommended it for years. I mean, it does have an effect,
Yeah.
but it's an acid solution, and so it tends to stop secretions. I prefer to work with if I had you as a client, I would prefer to work in such a way that the condition was cured rather than just suppressed with the acid solution.
Yes. Yeah. Because she gets it when she's swimming, because her
Yeah,
ears are floppy.
yeah, yeah.
It contains, but it's ultimately still coming from inside out, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and they usually blame yeast, which is not accurate because
Oh.
all dogs have yeast in their ears.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
so all
didn't
the
know that.
yeast are doing, there might be more yeast because they're just living in all the secretions, but they're not the
Right.
cause of it. It's an autoimmune disease.
Oh.
That's been
Oh,
established by research in Japan. Yeah,
oh, wow. Okay. I
yeah,
didn't know.
yeah.
Um, I guess if we weren't going through all of the things that we were going through with, the environment, the chemicals, and, abuse, um, what would you say the ideal diet would be for them?
I think, we bring in, my wife and I bring in the other factors, the resources.
Hmm.
We're getting to, in coming, the world is, you've heard this, I'm sure, that raising animals raising livestock to be eaten is very, very inefficient.
Right.
And it's, like cutting down the rainforest to grow soybeans to feed the cattle, and it's just causing so much damage. They're talking now, like you've heard this terms and lines, like we're basically using 6 Earths right now to support ourselves.
Right. Right.
So we can't keep it up. We're going to run out of resources, water and soil and so on. So it's going to end anyway.
Right.
So we say, adapt to that. Stop trying to feed, raise livestock for food. Let's return the earth to more natural conditions so we survive, all of us.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and the last thing is the ethical, because I think that it's not really right to raise animals for food that way and have them suffer so much and
Yeah.
then kill them and feed them to us and to dogs and cats because we
Absolutely.
prefer those animals.
Right.
I don't
Right.
think that's right to do. And so
Right.
it's not going to, I don't think you can, just my personal opinion, I don't think you can expect that you can mistreat another form of life and expect then it's going to do good for you.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think it works.
No. Oh, that's a profound answer.
So
Yeah.
for all those reasons, I'd say we need to move away from the emphasis on eating livestock and other animals. We need to look more at being efficient and being organic and being more holistic in all our views here. It's a large problem. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
We have to look at the whole issue because now the way people feed, if they do the raw meat diet, for example, with a large dog, they're using a lot more protein and
Yeah.
livestock than humans are eating. It's caused a big
Right.
impact on the world.
Right.
So I don't feel it's right ethically to do that.
Right. I mean, humans don't even eat that much if
No,
you were eat, doing the raw meat thing.
right.
Um, what's your take on fasting for dogs?
I didn't particularly emphasize that in my practice, but I think it's
Hmm.
probably okay.
Yeah. Um, so something I had read was that wolves in the wild will, hunt an animal, kill it, eat it, but then their body goes through a week or 2 weeks of digestion, and they're basically fasting and munching on just, little things. Um, and some people that I know who are, vegans and their dogs are vegans will fast them sometimes occasionally just to let things out. And their argument is that wolves do it.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. But I wasn't sure if that was a good idea. I know it's good for humans, but I
I
think
can't
for
really
other
answer.
animals,
I don't have any experience really doing that.
yeah. Um, I guess that was kind of the last of my questions. There's a friend of mine who really wanted to know if you had a stance on spaying and neutering.
Well, it seems necessary oftentimes because we don't want too many animals in our cities and towns
Yeah,
and countryside turned loose, right? Because it causes so
right,
much damage to the environment. So it seems necessary. I mean, you could not spay or neuter them and try to confine them, but it's not pleasant.
right, right, right.
So I probably is necessary in today's world. I think it's better to wait until they're more mature instead of real young because it
Yeah,
interferes with their growth. So I have always recommended waiting until, if possible, wait until the dog or cat had their first heat. And then
right.
after that was a good time to do it. But, I know they recommend it really early, puppies and kittens now, which I don't think is
Oh,
smart, but
no.
no.
Speaking of puppies and kittens, you talk a lot about vaccines.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm personally anti-vaccine, um, and I don't, I don't believe in the regular, the monthly, whatever, the 6 months, because I think I've seen and heard some horror stories. And I know your opinion is a little bit more towards that as well.
Have you looked at the papers on my website about it?
Not, no, not yet. I read a couple actually, but not all of them. But yes, I
Well,
do
there's
know about rabies having the effects, and yeah,
there's two of them from talks I gave in the 90s that are on my website, and they're about vaccines. But yeah, there's the vaccine. It's interesting because I went to graduate school after my veterinary degree after a few years, 2 or 3 years of practice, and I went into in a PhD program, and I studied immunology
hmm,
and mostly virology. When immunology includes studying vaccines, you see, so I went into
right,
that in some depth. And it's very interesting to have that training and come back and see how people think about this.
right,
Because, like, for example, if you have a vaccine, it's been shown with vaccines that are effective that seem to have create a good immunity.
right,
That immunity lasts your whole life.
right,
You
right,
never have to repeat the vaccine.
right.
So when they're doing these repeated vaccines, it's because they're not a very good vaccine.
Okay.
That's the reason they're pushing it. And the money involved, of course.
Yeah, the money. That's what was my assumption, is that it was more money and than effectiveness. I thought maybe they were over affected or not regulated and not tested and just, um, you
Yeah,
know,
they don't do really to my perspective on is they don't really do the good science with it. But they're talking now with this current COVID virus thing, they're talking about producing a vaccine without testing it, which
right.
is really
I've heard
stupid
that.
because
Yeah,
you can have a vaccine that makes you more susceptible.
right, right,
So why would you do that to all these people? It's really seems wrong.
right. So when in thinking about canine vaccines, I'm sure you've seen the development and the progression of how we've come here. We have the puppy packages, and every 6 months. I'm sure that back when you started, it was maybe one vaccine or maybe none.
There were three. There was all DHP, distemper hepatitis, and
yeah,
lepto, I guess it was. Not DHP, that's not right. DHL, distemper
yeah,
hepatitis and lepto. Those were the puppy vaccines.
yeah.
So now I
Do
know
you
there's more.
do you know what brought us here to these 12 vaccines that we have now?
I think it's mostly just people promote them because they have a belief in them. They don't really have the training in immunology to understand. Excuse me.
So when you're as a somebody who's going through veterinarian school in the last very recently, are just like diet, are they being taught about vaccines at a limited amount, or is
Yeah,
it?
I think it's rather limited, quite limited, actually.
Yeah.
I've seen videos, excuse me. I've seen videos with MDs where they discuss that, and they talk about how very little training they've had in
Right.
vaccinations.
Right. Right.
Same vet school.
Right. Yeah.
Just told to
Diet
do
and
it. It's a belief system. Here,
right.
vaccinate, protects them.
Right.
And they don't know any better. They don't even know what a vaccine does. They don't know how they work or anything.
Right. I think I was watching C-SPAN years ago, and it might have been C-SPAN or it might have been a documentary. I can't remember, but it was some group was coming together to promote doctors get, I think, a 3-hour nutrition course every 7 years, and the AMA representative came in just on fire, saying no, 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 no.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, I have my suspicions, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's really it's not scientifically based, and it's not really done, in my
right,
opinion, as it should be.
yeah. So I know you recommend in your latest book, I think it's parvo and distemper are the two. Is that right? Those are the two vaccines that I think you for.
Yeah, rabies they require by law, but it's required not by veterinarians. It's called by the medical profession. The human medical profession has put it into
Right.
law. As far as the other ones, it's a choice because I do give the possibility of working with a homeopathic veterinarian instead.
Yes. Right.
But if you can't do that, then I talk distemper and parvo because they're the most serious diseases that your dog can die from them. So those are the ones. The other one diseases aren't that significant. They're
Right.
minor.
Right. And do you recommend just getting them once, or like you said that if
Well,
you get
it should be adequate to get it once if they're healthy.
right,
That's part of the problem. See, we go back to what we talked about earlier. If you have a dog that's been on a commercial food diet or on a raw meat diet, and it's built up hundreds of chemicals in its body so that it's not very healthy anymore, and its
right,
immune system now has been working against these chemicals for years, trying to deal with them, right?
right,
Can't get rid of them.
right.
And now you
Yeah.
put vaccines in. Can it respond properly to a vaccine? See
No.
the problem?
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
hard to answer that question. I'd say if they're healthy, yes,
Yeah.
they mount to. If it's a properly made vaccine and they're healthy, they'll have a lifelong immunity. If it's not properly made, which a lot are not,
Right.
or they're not healthy to start with, they're not going to have a good response.
Right.
So in a way, I could put it like this: the medical profession has a distorted view of the problem. It's taking
Yeah.
animals that are presented to them that are not healthy, and then when they have symptoms, they try to suppress the symptoms or do something like vaccination instead of looking at, well, what's the problem? Why aren't they healthy in the first place?
Right.
That should be the focus, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah.
But they don't look at
Uh,
that.
right. Yeah, because I think even in the medical profession, the you go to your doctor, his job isn't to figure out what's wrong. His job is to treat the symptoms, pain relief. Yeah.
That's what allopathic means. You've heard that term,
Yeah.
allopathic medicine. Allopathic, it translates to countering symptoms. That's what the word means. So you're
Yeah.
just using drugs or whatever to counter the symptoms, but it's not bringing health back.
Right. Yeah. Just depressing. I was
Just,
always told to let a fever happen because that is your body's way of naturally healing.
yeah,
Whereas,
that's what it feels. Mhm.
right, instead, don't take the Tylenol, don't take the medicine to suppress it, 'cause
No,
then you're just gonna
foolish.
keep it in. Yeah.
Well, have you ever
So
heard
for
what the explanation of what the function of a fever is?
no, no,
Well, let's
what's
say
the
you got a virus or a bacterial infection or something, and you develop a fever. And we know that what's happening on a cellular level is that cells are coming in, white cells coming in from the blood, and trying to eat up the bacteria. The virus is trying to counter them, right?
right?
Okay. The bacteria moves very quickly, as does a virus. They move quickly in the sense that a bacteria reproduces itself every 20 minutes. You see,
Got
a
it.
virus, if it gets in a cell, within a short time produces thousands of copies of itself. So
Wow.
they move really fast. So the
Yeah.
body, in response, speeds up the cells it has, the white cells, to move faster by raising the temperature.
Wow. Yeah.
That's the mechanism. So
Wow.
everything, metabolism and the movement of fluids, everything speeds up with a fever. And that
Yeah.
gives it then the ability to overcome it.
Right. Oh, so I always heard that it speeds up to expel it from the skin.
No. Mm.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's accelerating the natural processes of the cellular immunity.
Yeah, so if you take Tylenol or you try to decrease your temperature, your body weight, body temperature, then
You
you're
become
slowing
less
down.
efficient. You lose your
Yeah.
ability to fight it off. That's right.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty profound. Wow. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, very. So for dog owners who, aren't sure, like myself, like I've been cooking for my dogs for years, um, you kind of want to know that you're on the right track. And, are there tests? There's like holistic veterinarians that I've seen that have thyroid blood tests. But are there tests that we can do to gauge our dog's health? Because they can't talk to us and say that they have aches and pains or, you know, tummy aches or whatever.
Well, no, there's not any real lab tests. I mean, I guess you could have lab tests and show something's not normal, but I mean, before that, where you're just not healthy,
Yeah.
but you're more or
Right.
less within normal parameters. No, there's no real test for that. No,
So not like a thyroid blood test or anything.
no,
Really? Okay. Well,
no.
save our money then.
No, the
Um,
way the primary signs are if an animal doesn't act very vigorous,
mhm.
doesn't have enthusiasm, the coat doesn't look very good, maybe,
Yeah.
the outer coat. Some of the functions don't seem very good, like it maybe has trouble with bowel movements or urination or something. Well, most veterinarians consider rather minor things, but they could be indications of the general health. So
Okay.
I think we tried to address that in our book. I don't remember now, but maybe we gave some guidance on that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't remember either.
Yeah.
So I wanted, this is, I would talk about poop. So for humans, you can gauge your health based on, what you expel. I notice when I cook for my dogs, or I do cook for my dogs, sometimes certain foods kind of come out not the way they went in, but similar. Like peas sometimes don't, you know, or maybe little
Yeah.
bits of carrots. Is that normal?
Well, if they're not digestible to them, it'll come through. So if that's you're seeing that, then I would say either they have to be cooked more or they have to be ground up or something, so they
Okay.
can digest them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think that's the last of my questions. Is there something
Okay.
that I forgot that you want to add, or
No, I think we've covered most of it, unless something wasn't clear. The main, I'm trying to maybe to summarize again. I'm trying to emphasize what I've learned over the years in my experience is there's a base or a foundation to consider regarding health, and that is the natural healthy state of the animal or the person. That's what should be our goal. That should be our intention, is to bring that about. And unfortunately, right now, that's not given attention. We don't look at susceptibility. coming back to the current virus epidemic as an example. If you have a virus of this is just basically a normal flu that's come along. It's
Right.
nothing special about it.
Right.
And so let's say that though, however, what is different, which is not the case, but let's say what was different was that it seemed highly violent in the sense a lot of people got seriously ill and died from it,
Right.
right? Compared to say a couple of years ago.
Right.
Then what we do is we blame the virus.
Right.
But probably more accurately, what's happened is we become more susceptible. You
Yeah.
see, it could be the same virus from 2 years ago, even.
Right. Right.
But now
Right.
we're not as healthy because of all these things we've done, the way we eat, what's happened
Right.
with our air pollution, 5G, whatever it is,
Yeah. Right.
Uh, so now we're not so healthy anymore. So now we're more susceptible to getting sick. So instead of taking responsibility for that and saying, okay, let's look at that. Let's find out, how we can make our environment more healthy. And
Right.
so therefore people aren't so susceptible to illness. Instead of doing that, we blame the virus.
Right. Right.
You see, it's
Yep.
not really an intelligent
Yeah. It's
response.
just right. It's the same as treating the symptom and not the cause.
Treating the symptoms,
Yeah.
not taking responsibility. We've made
Right.
this mess.
Right.
We humans have made it.
Right.
And it's not going to get better unless we
Yeah.
turn around and start dealing with stuff,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's it for me.
Okay,
Your
cool.
combo. Yeah. It was such a pleasure, and I'm so unexpected. I didn't, like I said, wasn't expecting you to ever respond, or so I'm excited that
Good.
I
Well, and
got
feel
the
free,
opportunity.
feel free to share this if you like,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
if
I
it's
will.
useful, if you feel it's useful.
Yeah. I might edit myself out a little, but I will definitely share your portion.
So
Thank you.
what do you do with your life? You have a job?
Oh, yes. I actually I work in healthcare. I work as an editor, but I work for um, like healthcare government uh, healthcare companies that work with the government. So
Oh,
I do um, I write the proposals mostly, write and edit the proposals to get the state contracts. So like we have Covered California here. Each state has their like mass care has theirs. So I just write those bids mostly. It's very boring. I intended to go into alternative medicine, but back when I was going through grad school, um, and becoming an ND wasn't really, worth it at that time, and I wasn't
yeah,
comfortable going to med
yeah,
school.
yeah.
But as the years gone by, I've been far more and more interested in going to veterinarian school, but
Mm, mm-hmm.
been really self-researching. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, interesting. Good work.
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
actually,
thank
do you
you.
have pets?
What's that?
I said, do you have pets, actually? I
Oh,
meant to ask that.
we don't have pets in that sense. We had a cat that passed away, and then we haven't gotten any since because we were doing more traveling and stuff. And then, but
Yeah.
I feed the birds outside, and occasionally
Oh,
javelina come by.
oh, that's awesome. And I don't know if it's too personal, you don't have to answer. Do you follow the same diet that you promote?
My wife and I were vegetarian for about 40 years.
Yeah.
And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we went to plant-based
Oh,
vegan diet. Mostly, I'd say what converted us in a sense, or maybe that's not the word, gave us understanding was Cowspiracy. Have you seen that?
yes. Oh, you know what? It's been on my list, but I haven't seen it. But I've seen a couple of others.
It's very good. It's very informative. And so
Yeah.
anyway, we realized how much impact that documentary is showing how livestock is a major cause for environmental damage
Right.
and raising livestock and what it's doing to the environment. And so we thought we don't have to eat those, So we just because what we were vegetarian. We didn't eat meat, but we did occasionally use some cheese and you
Yeah.
know maybe once in a while some eggs or something. So anyway, we just stopped doing that, and so we've been
Yeah.
eating that way. Well,
And do you enjoy it?
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
food.
Yeah. fruits and vegetables.
Well, your taste change.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I had no problem with you know, when I was vegetarian, I had no problem with desiring meat. In fact, I was kind of repulsed by it when I'd smell it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, and so when we gave up some of the other things, that's fine. I don't feel any desire for them. I know some people say they struggle with that, but I don't.
Yeah.
And there's a
I
lot of
struggle with
choices now.
butter.
Yeah, but there's some good vegan choices.
Yeah, yeah. No, there are. There are. Yeah, I
I
think
can't tell the
I'm,
difference really.
yeah. I know I need to be better about trying the alternatives. But I'm pretty much vegan myself too, minus the butter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I can recommend coconut butter. It's really nice.
Oh, okay. I'll try that.
I like it. It's
I
not
love,
not coconut oil. I mean, it's related, but there's some jars you get that says coconut butter. They're a
uh-huh.
little more solid, and you can spread it on your toast or whatever, just like you would
Yeah.
butter. And it tastes good.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was nice talking to you, and
Yeah, very nice talking to you.
thanks for your
And
work.
yeah, I'll send you the write up before I post anything, and I'll send you the video before I post it as well, because I probably
Okay.
will take myself out of it.
I don't think you need to.
I'm-
You look very nice, very attractive.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll send it to you before I post anything so you have a final look.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye bye.